Greetings. A few quick housekeeping items to share with you as we get started here. During the presentation, you will be able to ask questions using a Q&A box that appears below the presentation window. Time permitting, your questions will be answered following the presentation. If time runs out, before we can get to all the questions, we will make sure the answers are emailed to you. We could run long and go past the top of the hour. If we do, we hope you can remain with us. But if you can't, you'll receive an email later telling you how you can view the entire presentation. Good afternoon, and welcome to what I believe will be a provocative but critical conversation about the urgent need for manufacturing supply chains to evolve in light of the stress testing they've encountered during COVID-19. I'm John Dyck, the Chief Executive Officer of CESMII, the Smart Manufacturing Institute, and I'm honored to be able to introduce to you a remarkable set of industry executives representing some of the most sophisticated, mature manufacturing and supply chain capabilities in the world. I've asked each of them to introduce themselves and to take a moment to share a brief anecdote about something that they've experienced during the pandemic. So I'd like to start with Kim Riddle from Proctor and Gamble. Kim?
Excellent. Thank you, John. And again, thank you. It's an honor to be part of this panel and conversation today. I am Kim Riddle. I work at Proctor and Gamble, and the current role I'm in is Vice President of Supply Chain Innovation. And P&G, as many of you know, serves the world's consumers every day across many product lines: fabric and home care products, personal and health care, baby and feminine care, and many others. The pandemic for us brought to life major challenges across our global, our regional, and our local supply chains. And we had to respond very quickly, and we did so with some leadership, first just to survive and keep our operations running, creating force for good products, putting together hand sanitizer, masks, face shields, and ventilators for our employees and the communities that we work in. So the pandemic for us really highlighted even more the importance of having strategic supply chain partnerships with suppliers, and the true need to improve our digital connections, our connectivity that's going to improve the resiliency and the response time to these dynamic and sometimes unforeseen challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Next, let's go to John Church of General Mills.
Thanks, John. Great to be here. My name is John Church. I work for General Mills, a global foods company. We make Cheerios, Yoplait yogurt, Blue Buffalo pet food, and I'm the chief supply chain officer there. The pandemic for us really caused a Herculean shift in our demand signal, and we have businesses that support both at home as well as away from home eating. And as lockdowns happened, as people started working more remotely, the demand surge on our at home business was just tremendous. So I think about our baking business. We saw a tenfold increase in demand for things like flour as people started baking with their kids and making desserts at home and those kinds of things. We sold a month's worth of soup in a day as people did some panic buying around those things. Some of our channels went from doubled the amount of e-commerce, whether that be click and collect or delivery to their home, as people started to worry about touchless and convenience and those sorts of things. And the changes associated with that, knowing where products were, how were we going to adapt, really forced us to try to understand what's the connectivity, what's the opportunity for us to do things in a way that's more elegant rather than by brute force. The flip side is our away from home business had to pivot, and while we had idle capacity, we had to take those lines. We actually produced for donation to try to feed folks as people were out of jobs. They ended up availing themselves of food shelves and things like that. So the amount of pivoting we had to do was something we had never experienced before.
Fascinating. Thanks, John. Cornelia Coles from Johnson & Johnson. Would you go next?
Yes, thanks, John. As John said, my name is Cornelia Coles, and I'm Vice President of Innovation, Supply Chain Innovation Orchestration and Scaling with Johnson and Johnson. Johnson and Johnson, as a company, uh, focuses on pharmaceuticals, consumer business, as well as medical devices. So, as many of you know, we were smack dab in the middle of the COVID response in the development of one of the vaccines that allow the world, hopefully, to kind of get back to our normal lives over a span of time. And of course, that required accelerated development, accelerated supply chain capabilities, etc. Also, leaning into our credo on not only serving our customers but our employees, we shifted some of our manufacturing to manufacture hand sanitizers, and we leveraged the innovation team to respond to the needs of the staffs within hospitals that were struggling with shortage of ventilators, and we leveraged external partners in our 3D labs to develop a splitter for the ventilators that allowed the hospitals to double capacity. So for us, on the consumer side, also we saw an increased demand on some of our main OTC brands, such as Tylenol, and so finding the capacity to keep up with that was also a challenge for the team. But leveraging our digital team to develop algorithms and things of that nature to help us kind of manage the demand in a much better way.
That's great, Cornelia. Thanks for that. Next is Robert Hull from RPI.
Hello, I'm Robert Hull. I'm the Acting Vice President for Research at Rensselaer. I'm responsible for the oversight and growth of the research enterprise across our university. Our research enterprise covers a broad spectrum of fundamental science, engineering, humanities, business, and technological applications. And supply chains is at the core of much of what we do, intersecting as it does with engineering systems, disaster relief, manufacturing, data analytics, to name just a few areas. So like the other presenters, we have our own experiences with the COVID pandemic, been engaged in developing, supporting the COVID testing and PPE response at our university. We initiated a comprehensive testing program with up to twice weekly testing for our community. We've administered now over 200,000 tests. And our biggest supply chain scare were the glass vials in which the samples are stored. And I could never have imagined 2 years ago that, the presence of glass vials would be of such urgent criticality to us. We also created over 10,000 face shields for our own use and for regional and local hospitals. And the critical supply chain element there was plastic for the visor, which we couldn't get from conventional sources for love or money. And we found an innovative solution from one of our team. We are now one of the largest purchasers of document covers in the country. That's what we made our visors out of. So needs breed new challenges and new solutions. I'll finish there.
I love it. And last but not least, we'll ask Jim Wetzel from NextGen Group to introduce himself.
Thanks, John. I'm very glad to be here today. I'm the co-founder of NextGen Group, an organization trying to really accelerate and help the digital transformation journey for manufacturers. In full disclosure, I also worked at General Mills for 32 years. I was director of engineering, responsible for global reliability. Also, in full disclosure, I used to be the interim CEO of CESMII. So a little bit about my background. On the pandemic side, what really hit me was the fragility of our ecosystem and our ability to have an agile and resilient response to a disruption. Now, I guess, no one has seen a disruption of this size, but Obviously, you heard the stories about how everyone had to adjust and scramble. So from my position, I said, what can I do to help? How can I help with the background and experience that I've had? And John Dyck and some government officials reached out to me through the CARES Act that got sponsored a little over a year ago, where the U.S. government was going to provide funding for topics that might actually help the supply chains and help COVID-19 resilience and try to figure out what to do. And they said, Jim, what could you come up with that might help us? And so collaborating with John and collaborating with a number of the folks on the board on this panel and others, this need to have a different kind of ecosystem was starting to emerge. And so my pandemic response was to figure out how to collaborate and bring us together and get us on the same page so we could try to tackle this issue in a dramatically different manner.
Thanks, Jim. What an incredible set of stories, and what an incredible set of representatives of some of the great companies and the great brands that represent the best of COVID response during a really, really difficult set of days, weeks, and months since last winter. So let me transition very briefly to a quick overview of who CESMII is and why we believe we're an important catalyst to bring these stakeholders together to solve some really, really important challenges for manufacturing. CESMII, which stands for the Clean Energy Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, is one of 16 institutes funded by the federal government to create a more competitive manufacturing environment here in the U.S. You'll see us, CESMII, in the bottom left-hand corner, headquartered in Los Angeles, California. We are funded by the Department of Energy, and we'll spend roughly $140 million over 5 years to invest in research and innovation that will drive manufacturing and energy productivity through large-scale deployment of smart manufacturing. Our vision is simple. It's to democratize or accelerate the democratization of smart manufacturing, working with all of the stakeholder groups in this ecosystem, as you see here, to dramatically reduce the cost and the complexity of smart manufacturing. This will have enormous implications for not just the large enterprises that you see represented here, but the small, medium manufacturing ecosystem as well, making smart manufacturing for many for the first time accessible to them as well. The focus of this panel and our objective today is to share with you what we believe to be a vital initiative to create real-time, end-to-end supply chain visibility as a standardized and de facto standard capability here for U.S. manufacturers. In March of 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, we, as the Manufacturing USA Institute leadership, began getting together on a weekly basis to determine how best to support U.S. manufacturing, given the enormous challenges that we were, in many cases, still are facing. Among other important initiatives, we decided to join forces to create a decisive set of strategies, policies, and recommendations designed to strengthen America's manufacturing base and improve our ability to respond to future disruptions. We summarized that in a paper called A National Manufacturing Guard, outlining the creation of several specific initiatives that will enable us to learn from the recent past and ensure that we're aggressively working toward a much more resilient supply chain and manufacturing base. In this paper, we recommend the creation of, number one, a National Manufacturing Guard, number two, a Technology Corps, which is essentially a gateway to America's 21st century workforce, and number three, a National Supply Chain Data Exchange, which was entirely inspired by the Supply Chain Task Force that we're here to discuss today, and that's represented here on this panel today. You can actually download a copy of this paper at manufacturingguard.com and engage there if you're interested in supporting this important initiative. We were then privileged to work with a bipartisan group of policymakers, including U.S. Senators Chris Coons and Marco Rubio, and Representatives Haley Stevens and Troy Balderson, who have leveraged these insights and recommendations to create a bill titled the Resilient Manufacturing Task Force Act. They introduced this legislation in January, earlier this year, to reinforce the U.S. supply chain against future disruptions, recommending the formation of these three initiatives I just outlined. You can find an executive summary of this entire initiative that I had the privilege of authoring on sme.org in an article entitled, as you see here, appropriately enough, the Resilient Manufacturing Task Force Act. As you've heard from Jim Wetzel, he's been instrumental in leading this supply chain task force for CESMII. Jim, I'd like to ask you to share a high-level overview of this initiative and kind of share with us a little bit about the overarching vision that became the foundation for this proposal and this national supply chain data exchange.
Sure, glad to. So as you heard from the intro from these companies, they're all faced with this issue of how to respond and how to react to this unprecedented disruption. And through the years, a lot of capital has been invested in these systems that provide connectivity to suppliers, to warehousing, to inventories, to manufacturing operations. And one theme that was true through all of these companies, as well as through other companies in the United States, was the ability to be connected, the ability to scale, the ability to actually have end-to-end coverage and transparency and visibility was somewhat limiting. Some would say, I'm very generous in the word somewhat, some people would say it was crippling. And at the end of the day, many stories will be told around the heroic nature of people and what people did to actually use phone calls, text messages, emails, their expertise and knowledge that they've had over 20 or 30 years of experience was maybe more fundamentally the critical sauce that made these companies successful. Because the backbone of what we had and the digital exchange that we had is still emerging, and it's still available only for a few maybe supercritical supply characteristics, but not necessarily the ones that were affected or impacted. And so what we're really trying to do here is this proof of concept with these leading and admired companies and with their associated partners and suppliers to demonstrate how we can actually create this national freeway, this national exchange of information, and do it at scale, and do it in such a way that it's just not my backbone, but it's our backbone. And so if you look at the history of all of these, every organization has had to create their own infrastructure and then add people and invite people to participate in their infrastructure. We know that that model is fragile. We know that that model is expensive. We know that model doesn't go end to end. So what we're trying to do here is actually shape this differently, much the same as President Eisenhower actually invested in the freeway system back in 1956. So we had to have a physical system to be able to do transportation across the United States. Now we're in 2021. We need a digital system to transport information from company to company, and to do that in such a way that it's extremely useful. John, could you advance to the next slide, please? What we did was I led this team of admired companies: General Mills, Johnson & Johnson, Procter and Gamble, ConAgra, Raytheon, Honeywell, and then some technology experts around ThinkIQ, Savagent, RPI, Microsoft. And what we did was we tried to figure out, what does this backbone look like? How might we do that? And we're not going to get into the technical details of that, but we articulated that. We also, and probably as important, was talked about the visibility and resiliency tools that people need to actually transform this data into work. So how do you synchronize and orchestrate and act on this data, this new data that's now connected and refreshed? And so a set of tools came forward that were kind of common, that were needed amongst all parties to be able to be more nimble and react to the disturbances and react to the information that might be coming to them. And lastly, to be able to create a playbook, a standardized playbook / center of excellence that all manufacturers could go to. A lot of this stuff is built into the best of the best companies. A lot of them are represented here today. But as you think about the 300,000 or 400,000 manufacturers out there, their ability to have world-class capability and participate in a world-class supply chain doesn't exist as robustly as it does with others. And so that's what we're trying to set out to do. We'll talk a lot more about that as the day goes on and as days go on with additional funding and project kickoffs. But that's kind of the high level overview, John.
Yeah, I think great summary, Jim. Thanks for that. Let me turn to the three manufacturers represented here on this panel and ask first you, John. Your teams collectively on this task force have told us that no manufacturer can do this on their own. You have deep pockets, you have a lot of expertise, but it takes a supply chain to pull this together. What would you say are the opportunities to creating this end-to-end real-time supply chain visibility with your supplier partners? And comment too, if you would, briefly on what you see as some of the challenges. In other words, if this is strategic, why hasn't this been done yet?
Terrific. So, as we look, there are 28,000 suppliers in our ecosystem, and there are absolutely opportunities around connecting digitally, automating, making response times quicker, being able to see where things are in transit, what the manufacturing queue looks like. That can help us run our systems better. It can help suppliers run their systems better. It can allow for more efficiency and more productivity. But it also is incredibly important during times of disruption, where something hits the fan, and you need to be able to navigate through a dynamic situation where things aren't running how they should. Being able to see things and being able to make decisions in real time just allows the ecosystem and the supply chains to be more agile. But there's 28,000 folks just in our ecosystem, and while we could build our own sorts of connectivity, our own protocols around how to share data, the reality is that's super expensive and not scalable. And more importantly, the same suppliers that supply us at General Mills supply Procter and Gamble, supply ConAgra, supply J&J, and we can't have a different answer for that. And so it isn't scalable. There has to be standardization. There has to be a way to approach that can allow American manufacturers to be more competitive. And that scalability is what we're looking for in this. We've tried to create this in the past, but it's been small and it's been tough to get adoption. You end up with fragmentation and eventually they die under their own weight. Our goal and our hope in participating in this is that we can find some middle ground that can benefit all of the ecosystem.
Great summary, John. Thanks. Cornelia, let me turn to you next and ask you the same question. What do you see as the opportunities? And if you have a moment as well on the challenges, that would be great.
Absolutely. So we see tremendous opportunity in having end-to-end visibility within our supply chain, and John touched on so many of those. Some of the challenges, however, for us have been the costs, right, associated with investing and creating the necessary digital ecosystem. Also, for us, the most significant challenge is, as we work through this, is orchestrating multiple functions and stakeholders to align and prioritize on the effort within J&J and with our suppliers. One way we've started to try to address this is connecting our initiative with our demand-driven supply chain strategic initiative and focusing on our most critical value chains within the organization. The challenge regarding systems within our company as well as with our suppliers are at different maturity levels, have found to be a challenge. The right intent is always is there, but it can be difficult. So while in other cases the challenge for the need for greater data generations internally and external as well to connect with our suppliers. So that's what we're seeing right now, John.
Thanks for that, Cornelia. And Kim, would you comment on that as well?
Absolutely. So, at P&G, our relationships and digital connections with our supply chain partners, it's always been fundamental and important. I think the pandemic just made it so obvious that what we have today is not enough. And we've been on this journey to synchronize our supply chains And to go end to end, we truly need some standard approach and scale. We don't have enough visibility and information to handle the disruptions, the change, and really be resilient and recover with the information that's available to us in real time on a daily basis. So like the other companies here today, P&G is very excited and interested in partnering with CESMII in getting on with this industry standardization so we can have some smart manufacturing data profiles. We can exchange data between suppliers, our contract manufacturers. We can plan appropriately and provide our goods to the customers and consumers that we serve. So for us, the biggest challenge is how do we get to that lack of data that requires a lot of customization? And we've done similar, tests, experiments, trials, pilots, but it becomes a barrier if we don't standardize and go for true scale and do it in a way that's going to serve everyone end to end.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Well said. And then for all of you, sort of implicit in all of the responses so far, the accessibility of these types of capabilities in the small medium manufacturing community are just a challenge, aren't they? It's just been it's difficult enough for the large enterprises, never mind the small medium enterprises. So Robert Hall, representing academia, we understand how important and necessary the role is that you play. We've invited you specifically to this supply chain task force for that reason. Would appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes and tell the audience about the vital role that you have played and can play going forward to advance this initiative.
Yeah, so thank you. This is a very exciting initiative to Rensselaer. It's a wonderful opportunity to partner with industry leaders such as General Mills, Procter and Gamble, and Johnson & Johnson, and to be at the ground floor in developing such a critical new supply chain solution. Any challenge of this complexity requires integrating expertise from multiple domains, multiple disciplines, and multiple perspectives. So we will be bringing faculty from the schools of science, engineering, and business to this particular project to lend their expertise and experience. We'll bring cutting-edge expertise in data science, technology, algorithmic design, human decision-making to create the foundations of these new resilient supply chain technologies. And in particular, we'll be providing solutions that harness the data revolution to provide solutions that respond to situational data, what we might call the speed of business. And then most of all, I think we're training the leaders of the future, whether it's at the undergraduate level, where, for example, the RPI principal investigator on the project, Professor Jennifer Bazur, teaches a class on design and analysis of supply chains, or whether it's the graduate students who will be involved, who we are training to create critical new knowledge and methodologies in this field. So this is the future.
Robert, I think that's a great summary. Your team has been instrumental in helping us drive this forward and providing a lot of the thought leadership from a modeling perspective, and overall, we're grateful for that. Let me turn to you, Kim, for the next question, and I'd like to be a little provocative for a moment. Why now? Why this team here? Why with CESMII? Meaning, why would we be the place to go and solve this strategic, national, if not global, challenge? Can I ask you for your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So why now and why us? If I look at building on successes from the past, one of the things P&G has been able to do successfully is partner in industry. So think within a manufacturing site where you have a variety of OEM and you put together a manufacturing process or packing system. And we've created standards called PACML and Universal PAC that have then been adopted broadly within a manufacturing setting. And that allows us then to have integrated data access and programming access and interplay between these components and parts to optimize the throughput, to optimize the performance. So building on that success, we can see this future state of having a national supply chain data exchange. It's bigger, right? It goes outside the walls of manufacturing and connects these industry standards end to end across multiple supply chains with multiple partners. And we want to stand together with this kind of illustrious group of industry partners and CESMII to co-design, co-develop, and bring this to life. I think now is the time. We've learned very challenging and painfully that there is a better way, and we have a reason to believe that we can do it. And we have the right set of partners here, amongst this group to go do the development and construct it and launch it as a national data exchange system.
Great, Kim, thank you. Robert, let me turn back to you for the same questions. Why us? Why now?
Yeah, so I think the fundamental issue is we now have access to just an extraordinary wealth of data, driven by a vast network of sensors and collection systems in an all-pervasive, intelligent internet of intelligent things. So we have the opportunity now to dynamically assess and reconfigure the increasingly complex and ever more interconnected supply chain network. The fundamental challenge, though, is that data is messy. It's inherently messy. It comes from many different sources with different structures, different provenances, different meanings. It's collected at different timescales and with different units. And to translate that massive data into tools that can aid decision-making requires new algorithms, new ontological and new computational tools. RPI is at the forefront of this field, and the technologies exist to find a solution. It's a critical challenge. Our alternative is simply to drown in the data. And if we need any further evidence of how critical this challenge is, we come back to the pandemic, where we've seen the tragedies of people dying because of lack of oxygen supply chains, as just one particularly low point and one low example. So we have the tools, we have the will, because we've seen what happens if we don't get this right, and through this program we have the opportunity.
Thanks, Robert. Jim, anything to add to that?
Well, I'll just add a couple things. I'm going to steal a quote that I've learned from John Church over the years. John, hopefully he'll let me take this. It allows us to be all in, right? So you think about what's been different and why us, why now, is because we can be all in. We don't have to have our own separate agenda on this topic. We just learned, like Robert said, about the traumatic issues of pandemic, not only from a business, but from a personal perspective. And so we finally have a chance to align. And we can align and rally around this topic because it's too big for any one company to solve. That's why us, why now. The other thing is that from a technical perspective, we're finally ready. We don't have to invent new technology. It's been invented for us. We have technology that we can take advantage of with cloud technology and web technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning, and all that stuff has been developed for over 20 years. So now, we take a look at the ability to get all in. We can rally all boats, and we can have even pillars of people, process, and technology applied to this problem, probably for the first time ever. In such a dramatic and terrible situation, to some extent, the future, the stars have aligned a little bit to allow us to rally around a common cause. And whenever you do that moonshot or that common cause, dramatic things are gonna happen. And so I think that the time is now. The we are us, and this is the time to actually make it happen.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I'm guessing by now most of the folks that are listening to us are probably asking some questions or thinking about the complexities that are involved in this, right? There have been attempts to do this in the past and they haven't succeeded. And so with competing incentives or the challenges that were already underscored, it's become clear that this would have to be a win-win for all participants to be a part of this. And we've also heard from the team that this initiative won't be successful if it's only helpful or relevant in extremely dire, sort of edge of the bell curve disruptions like a pandemic. What we need to do is make sure that we structure this initiative, this proof of value or proof of concept, to deliver value in normal operations, normal day-to-day operations, as well as the sort of edge of the bell curve scenarios that we've just experienced. So let me ask you first, Cornelia, what incentive would your suppliers, many of which are these small, medium enterprises, what incentive would they have to participate and share important data with you? Is there any way that this effort could be structured to make them better, to help them improve? How do we get to a win-win?
Absolutely. From a win-win standpoint, as we go through this effort and liberate the data, it's important for the suppliers to have access to that data that would also be critical to them and their operations. This means real-time access to demand data and the ability to interact with us as the customer in real time regarding that data. It's important that the suppliers benefit from some of the key aspects that we anticipate as a supply chain organization ourselves. The most important of which is serving our end customer in a more predictable manner. However, there are other benefits such as optimized inventory, quicker decision making, data-driven insights, and increased productivity, which are shared with our suppliers. Hopefully, this results in a different relationship, the one which is more collaborative and a true partnership.
I love that. John Church, I've heard you say similar things in the past. Would you comment as well? How do we get to a win-win?
Yeah, I agree absolutely. First of all, your statement around this has to work for all parties or else it falls apart, I think that's really critical. And I think it's all parties, including small players that are super important parts of our supply chain and may not have the wherewithal or the technical capability or maturity to participate. That's why this is so exciting for us. The data, and I agree with Cornelia, that the data sharing and the ability to orchestrate and see things just unlocks capabilities. If you're a supplier, yes, we benefit as General Mills, and we've seen that we can optimize our performance, our costs, serve our customer. But if you're a supplier, if you can see what our needs are going to be, if you can see what Proctor's needs are going to be, if you can see what your other customers' needs are, you can understand if there's more availability of business for you to go get. You can think about how to optimize the entire portfolio of your business in order to minimize transportation costs, in order to build the most effective schedules, and that'll lead to more economic wherewithal. I think that it's clear to us that the visibility in the data will unlock, and there's no question, regardless of where you play in the value chain, it's an opportunity for you.
I think that's great, John. It seems to me that the pandemic itself has created this unique sense at this point in time that this type of a bilateral partnership is real, or at least is achievable for perhaps the first time in certainly my career, my visibility into the marketplace. So Robert Hall and Jim, let me ask you the same question here. There have been attempts to solve various aspects of this challenge, and yet the challenge is still before us. It's still significant. There are many efforts underway right now. So RPI, what are your thoughts on how we can improve, how we can be transparent and collaborative about the various initiatives related to this proof of concept, proof of value?
Yeah, so thank you, John. So there has been something of a graveyard of putative supply chain solutions in the past, but we see three things which are significantly different now. The first, as we've discussed several times, just the national will based on the severe and often life-threatening challenges arising from the pandemic. The second is data, and the sensors and tools such as edge computing that go with it. And this initiative, in our opinion, really integrates the right components to make the solution work. So domain knowledge, data-informed decision-making, and the emphasis on data standardization, on ontological structures, and just the contextualization of data profiles. So these, I think, are the right ingredients. We believe firmly are the right ingredients for the basis for a universal platform.
Thanks, Robert. Jim Wetzel, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that What's different about this initiative than a lot of the other things that have been sponsored or done in the past is really around our agendas. So, NSF and NIST and other organizations have funded initiatives with universities. Universities struggle to get data from industry, or they get a separate set of data. You have vendors who are trying to create solutions that are they're trying to get to market to sell. What's interesting about here is we're trying to really build a collaborative team, and we're building out this proof of concept and this demonstration use case in industry. At Procter and Gamble, at General Mills, at J&J is going to be the demonstration. So I think what's unique and really allows us to maybe cross that chasm is to take those great ideas that have been invested in and get them into industry in these example cases.
I think that's spot on, Jim. I think it's important to recognize, as I think you both did, that there are many complementary, synergistic organizations that are thinking important thoughts about these capabilities, and that we can work collectively with the best of breed, with the brightest minds out there to solve this problem in a way that actually moves the needle forward in a measurable way for this initiative. I'd like to ask John, Cornelia, Kim, and Robert to take a couple minutes each and just elaborate a little bit about this initiative as a whole. How important is this both to your organizations and to our joint vision for a thriving, sustainable, and competitive manufacturing environment here in the U.S.? John, would you start us off?
Sure, happy to. The world moves a lot faster. It moves at the speed of light, literally, and in a way that hasn't been predictable. So, as we used to rely on expertise and age-old processes and those kinds of things, it's clear to us that as the marketplace moves, as our consumers move, we're going to need to lever digital and connected capabilities in order to respond appropriately, and that is going to require a level of investment that, quite frankly, the return on is limited if players can't share data and allow for this orchestration, this connectivity. And so the necessary platforming, the agreements, the sort of pre-competitive nature of being able to see and have protocols across the supply chain is an incredibly important enabling capability. Data sharing is going to be key to the future resiliency of supply chains. And I think that we can get inspired by the pandemic and what we all saw and the heroism and the brute force that was necessary. But I think all of us would agree that's not sustainable. It may not be repeatable. And while, yes, COVID-19 was one, we fight these things all the time. There's been several hurricanes in the last 18 months. There was a fuel shortage and a pipeline shutdown. There are disruptions in our supply chains all the time that we're going to have to deal with. Being able to see and navigate and come up with alternatives to allow us to continue to function despite the disruptions, I think is a really important capability and one that's worth investing in. Certainly, we're anxious to be part of the solution and part of the test.
Thanks, John. Cornelia?
So this is extremely important for Johnson & Johnson as a leader in transforming supply chain for healthcare. We must absolutely be prepared to take on areas such as end-to-end visibility. This in order to remain an agile, responsive, and flexible supply chain to serve our customers and to compete globally. COVID has only magnified the need for this. We're embracing this on our own, but an initiative such as this would allow us to move faster, which is extremely important in today's fast-moving competitive environment. Having common approaches and standards will allow companies large, mid-size, and small to engage with one another to create greater visibility that leads to informed decisions, and greater linkages will lead to more agile and flexible and resilient supply chains and timely execution for the betterment of our patients and for our customers. So for us, this is extremely important.
Thanks, Cornelia. Kim?
Yeah, so for P&G, I mean, we're super excited to be invited in and join the CESMII-led initiative. We see the value definitely in having a national supply chain data exchange. And for us, we want to be industry leaders in supply chain innovation and continue to optimize and improve both what we do, but the businesses we operate with in a supply chain. So historically, I think the pandemic was kind of a wake-up call, right? We really did need this in prior years, and now it's needed even more. And we should not delay it for the future. Let's get on with the great partners in industry that are here in this panel. We want to take that first big step and get the standard and the highway written and that infrastructure so that the future becomes real, and then we can help adopt it more broadly. So for me, it's about effectively taking this initiative on, partnering with where the mastery and knowledge is, and bringing it alive in an effective and a scaled way to serve the better good, right? The better good for all of us in supply chain and operations.
Yeah, well said, Kim. Thank you. Robert, would you add your comments as well?
Clearly, this is important to the nation, ultimately to the world, to enable sustainable delivery of materials writ large, I mean, efficiently, economically, and when necessary under conditions of great duress. And John Church is so correct when he says it's not just the pandemic. I mean, we're forever trying to deal with creating supply chains in natural disasters, and sometimes doing very poorly at it. So the Katrina example comes to mind. So there's so much better that can be done to sustain human well-being and ultimately human lives. I mean, we've always known this, but the pandemic brought home how we've been susceptible to the weakest link in the supply chain. And again, never did I imagine that I would be desperately reliant on document covers. And then for RPI, this represents a forefront intellectual challenge that embodies our motto, why not change the world? That motivates our faculty, and it provides outstanding training opportunities for our students. So partnerships like this are incredibly important to us.
Thank you, Robert. And let me just pause for a moment before we transition to our audience Q&A here. That it's been a real, genuine privilege to have you on this panel today, sharing your perspective, sharing your thoughts, your insights. It's also been a privilege to work with your teams to put these strategies together, to create a vision, to work across boundaries and establish a project proposal that actually gets to the point where we can put a cohesive national strategy together to solve some of these vital challenges. So thank you all. With that said, we have approximately 15 minutes for a few audience questions.
Let me instigate a dialogue here with the panelists. Jim Wetzel, if I could start with you. There are clearly many other attempts to solve various aspects of this problem, and yet the challenge is still significant. There are many efforts underway even now. Jim, could you perhaps comment on that and share some thoughts with you on the broad perspective, the broad spectrum of initiatives in this area?
Sure, absolutely. And John, you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, there's a lot of activity in this space. Obviously, there's a bit of a holy grail aspect to this. We've been trying to achieve a digital transformation of all these organizations and companies as they connect and potentially share information. You heard the stories already around the complexity, the messiness, the cost of doing that. Ultimately, I think what's going to be different around this one is the approach we're taking. So one of the novel things that's happening under the CESMII umbrella is the concept of data profiles and the ability to basically have plug and play capability of your information, along with provenance and governance of that information. So those that create it control it and decide how to participate that data into the supply chain. So that's a novel difference. The second is the willingness of these organizations to actually participate in an ecosystem that maybe they didn't create. So you heard John Church talk about that from General Mills around, we've got to come up with different ways to do this. We've got to figure out how to exchange data with our partners, with our trusted partners, so that we can do business differently. Data structures and frameworks and stuff that have been done in the past have not taken on the context of this national infrastructure, this national approach. It's primarily been driven around how I expand my ecosystem. You know, supplier 1, company 2, supplier 3, company 4, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to think differently on this topic, but at the same time to learn from what people have done before and what successes they've had, and as well as what failures. I mean, most of the time we learn a lot by failing, and people don't want to talk about that, but that's really where a lot of lessons can be learned. So I hope that provides some input.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. John Church, let me ask you a question that's come from the audience here. Could you say more about the urgency to have these capabilities? Is this something that's important for us to be working on now? Can we afford to wait? What are your thoughts there?
You know, I think that we can always afford to wait. The problem is where this is needed is certainly during crisis, but it pays benefits during steady state. And so the question I'd have is why? Why would we choose to wait? Why wouldn't we steel ourselves against disruption and invest in things that'll work for us during peacetime as well as wartime? And as we are navigating things like the pandemic, we found out that we had to make much more quick decisions. We had to do it in a way that with information and systems that didn't tie together, and there's not enough emails and cell phone calls and text messages in the world to make America resilient if we can't build a foundational platform. And so from my perspective, the urgency is that we know what can happen. We have an understanding of how to do it. And if we can get ourselves on the same page in something that not only suits big manufacturers like the ones you see on the screen today, but also the rest of our ecosystems that allow us to operate, information is democratized in a way that people can use to their advantage. For me, the opportunity to strike is now, the energy is now. Let's move forward and do it.
Great, thanks for that, John. Kim, let me pose a question for you from the audience here. Are you ready to share data? What are your concerns? Is cybersecurity a concern?
Thanks, John. Hey, absolutely. Procter and Gamble sees the benefit of having this data exchange in a common framework, and that'll mean that there is information that needs to be visible to those upstream and downstream in our supply chain. We will have to, I'll call it, construct and design and pilot and do this together, bring together our best practices so that it's safe, it's protected, and it serves the benefit that we all see by having this visibility on digital and data sharing. So absolutely yes, and joining partnership with the industry powerhouses that are on this panel, I think are going to be super important because we can bring the best wisdom together and do it with all the knowledge that's available.
I love that. It speaks to the need for and the benefit of an entire ecosystem. Cornelia, let me ask you the next question from the audience here. Industry has a poor track record of following standards or even best practices. Can we as an industry adhere to these types of supply chain data exchange guidance? I think you're on mute, Cornelia.
I am. The world of Zoom. No, thanks, John, for the question. From Johnson & Johnson's perspective, the industries and markets that we usually serve kind of require that, we follow standards. But typically, if you see, when you're thinking about standards or thinking about best practices, people typically adopt them when they're win-win situations, right? When there's something in it for them. And certainly this initiative has that in droves, right? And I think the price of not doing it, if we get the masses on board, will become too big for others not to follow the standards or get involved. But I think as we think about our approach and how we do this, ensuring that there's a win for the manufacturers, win for suppliers, and win for others throughout the ecosystem would allow for adaptability and eagerness to adopt the standards.
Thanks, Cornelia. I think that's a great perspective. Let me turn to Robert and ask you, what are the emerging or future fields where these technologies could be further developed?
Well, thank you, John. Yeah, I mean, this partnership with Procter and Gamble and Johnson & Johnson and General Mills and the opportunity to create such a robust and interfacial and impactful system is in itself a very highly exciting frontier. But one could dream of extending some of these methodologies to even more what we might call extreme situations, such as space, the battlefield, disaster relief, to name a few, where supply chains may be longer in both distance and time, where they may be more expensive to fulfill, and where they may be more prone to disruption. And of course, each of those are understatements. So could one marry optimized supply chains with local materials, for example, in-transit processing, and planned reconfiguration and reuse at the location? And I could see how some of these methodologies could even play into, scenarios as sort of forward-looking, as complex as those. I've got one other thought I want to add. It's only really a half-formulated thought, but I think it should be in all of our minds as we think about integrating potentially additional functionality. So, for example, social justice. Could we find ways to integrate intelligence into this network, into this supply chain methodology for minority, women, or veteran-owned businesses, for avoiding products that exploit labor conditions, that inherently minimize carbon footprint, for example. So I could imagine, even beyond this, exciting and broadly relevant challenge we're addressing now, a whole slate of future opportunities.
Yeah, I think the opportunity seems significant and if not endless there. Robert, thank you. Jim Wetzel, great question posed asking, can you describe, I'm sorry, wrong question. Why not take advantage of already existing frameworks or technical standards and best practices available within organizations like MESA or the automotive or electronics industries? I think that's an important thing to consider.
Well, we will. I mean, we will take advantage of those that have gone before. We will take advantage of those frameworks and structures. I would just suggest, though, we're pushing the boundaries on this, right? So those frameworks and structures that have gone before obviously have done a lot of good, but they haven't solved the problem either. So we want to learn from that, and then we want to move ahead.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. The reality is this problem, this challenge, this opportunity is one that exists for reasons we understand. We've addressed and pointed to in the dialogue here so far. But the reality is it's still an unsolved opportunity or challenge. And working with the existing capabilities, the existing standards that are out there, leveraging those where it makes sense, where we can, that's indeed part of the research effort and part of the work that this team has identified and plans to execute on as we go forward. We have far too many questions far more questions than we can actually answer in this time frame, but I'll try to get to a few more. Jim, there's another one that I'd like you to address. It's of a more pragmatic nature. Can you describe what this supply chain data exchange might look like? In other words, will each manufacturer and each supplier be using specific technologies to enable this real-time connection? What might this look like?
Well, we're in the process of figuring all that stuff out, but this crystal ball of what it might look like is really the concept of in the cloud, you would have a data broker mechanism that would allow the exchange with governance and provenance of the data that's contributed by the supplier, by the manufacturer into the cloud, going through a broker, and the broker would then connect it to the right place. So an analogy is like the old AT&T phone system, where you have a board and you have an operator at the board, and you have one ringy dingy and two ringy dingies, and you're connecting the cords, right, to mesh up. My data needs to go here, my phone call needs to go there. And so what we're really talking about is an infrastructure that would take full advantage of cloud technology. They take full advantage of a data broker technology, take full advantage of creating a common data model so that we understand when someone says an inventory, or it says a finished good, or it says whatever, that those are defined and described, much like some of the standards organizations like GS1 and others are doing in different areas. But really to provide that universal almost hub and spoke kind of scenario where I can mesh up my data with those that need to consume it.
Great, thanks, Jim. I'll respond briefly to two questions, and then we'll wrap here. There's probably 20 or more questions that we don't have the time to respond to, but we will respond to each of the individuals and post the Q&A on our website at CESMII.org as well. One of the questions here is, what specific actions are you seeking by the Biden-Harris administration? Is it already acting on your requests considering this announcement today? So the short answer is we have submitted a proposal to execute on that these three organizations, plus RPI, plus Microsoft and CESMII, will be executing on, assuming we get funding for this project. And that's what we're requesting for right now, demonstrating the scope of the opportunity and the challenges, the thought leadership, the work that's been done already that we believe enables this ecosystem to collaborate together and in the ways defined here, so that we can get to the point where we're actually implementing and executing on this proof of value, this proof of concept. So that's the sort of actions that we're seeking for as we look for support for this initiative. The final component here was we have the manufacturers represented on this effort. Is there a need to have anyone representing their suppliers and or contract manufacturers? That's the nature of this project as a whole. We've identified these three manufacturers plus roughly 30 suppliers that are part of this proof of value, for whom we will connect their manufacturing operations to the manufacturing side, so that there is a real-time flow of information between the suppliers and the manufacturers themselves. So that's actually part of this proposal, that we develop the actual technology and then implement these capabilities. And the playbook, as you saw in the previous set of slides and responses, the playbook that then allows us to be scaled up for tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of manufacturers across the country, assuming we're successful in demonstrating these capabilities and driving the support necessary, the policy, effective policies that are required to see this entire initiative move forward. So with that, I want to thank the panelists here, an outstanding group of executives and leaders, and look forward to engaging with this marketplace more broadly as we see the support for this initiative and have the opportunity to actually see this turn from a proposal, from theory into practice. Thanks again to the SME for the partnership, for the opportunity to engage in this important dialogue, and have a good day.